Started.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Dmitry Bakulchik, so I'm working currently at IPAM Lithuania. And today we're gonna talk about mostly about classes and inheritance in JavaScript. It might be not an easy topic by a couple of reasons. And I think first of all, in contrast to other languages, JavaScript provides a kind of an exotic way of dealing with inheritance. And a second one, there are a couple of different types of syntax. So it is ES5 and ES6. But this topic is really important when dealing with modern frameworks, because the majority of them just allows you to define a component using classes. So you must know how to deal with them. And JavaScript itself comes with a prototype-based inheritance. So it close to, it looks like we can inherit one object from another one. And during this session, we'll get a little bit into details, and we will learn what object prototype is and how to use the constructor functions to extend its prototype. And we will also learn about the prototype chain. So I will start from my presentation, and if time permits, we'll have maybe a live coding session where we'll create a set of custom classes to deal with Bootstrap UI components. And feel free to stop me and ask any questions as we go. Okay, so let's get started then. Sorry, can you see my screen? I don't see nothing.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, just a second. Yeah. So let's start from regular objects. We call it object literals. So actually, if you need to pass some data with certain structure, we can create an object with some fields. So in this case, if fields are defined in object, we call it object properties. So in this case, we can easily access it by using dots operator when creating some persons, for example. And probably from the previous lecture, you have already learned how to define methods to this object. So in case we're defining additional function to this object, like using this way, so it means that this person can call this function. In this case, this function will get a special keyword called this. So in this case, this will be referring to the exact object that was used before dot operator. So yeah, in this case, this function will be called object method. Okay. So this approach. It's good. We can define some objects in our code, but some difficulties appear when we need to create, for example, like 10 or 1,000 of persons. And each person should have like two fields, for example, first name and last name, and another one called get full name that will just return the full name of the person. So in this case, if we're creating the person using this approach, we would need to define its methods every time we define an object, right? and it's a bit tricky. So this place where actually maybe classes that help up with. So take a look how we can define classes in JavaScript. So actually, I can start from saying that actually classes don't really exist in JavaScript. So what we have, it's really it's only functions. So let's find out how we can use functions to define a new classes. So actually, in order to reuse these methods from the person, we can create a function that will call person. So there is kind of naming convention. So all classes should start from a capital letter. And what we do here, we just copy all our code that we were using for literals here. So in this case, if we call this function with the new operator, this function will act like a constructor functions. So what it means, so whenever we are calling this person with this new operator, this will create a new object for you implicitly, probably. So you can think there is, as you can see, there is this keyword. So it will be referring to the new object. So you can think that this from the first line it will be referring to the empty object. And after this, the object will be populated with the fields and properties and methods. So in this case, when we will use a new operator to create new instance of class, it means that we'll have the same functionality of it. We could use the first name and get full name as well. So yeah, in this case, as you can see, the person is returning new object. So as you can see, the last line of this is implicitly returning this. So actually, what is class in this case? The class is we can think of it's kind of maybe template that defines all properties and methods that are common to all object1 type. But yeah, technically we can say that JavaScript doesn't have classes itself, and we can use regular functions that will act like constructor. But as you can see here, there is no like maybe use case for this class because we hard coding our values in a constructor. So let me demonstrate how we could use like default parameters with classes. For example, when creating a new class, we could pass exact first name and last name to it. And in this case, the first name and last name will be just a parameter of the function. And what we do here is just assigning this first name and last name to the object, to this. And what it does, it allows us to create some multiple persons where we have a new separate first name and last name for each of them. Okay, let's move on. Any questions so far? Okay, if no questions, let me switch to introducing a prototype. So for example, let's say that we have a couple of persons here, right? So each of them has exact separate first name and last name. But what about get full name? So as you can see, it's always equal to, we're just concatenating the first name and last name. So in this case, each person will contain not only the first name and last name and the reference to this method. So it will be kind of duplicated in each person. So for some cases it's okay, but you know, it may not be maybe efficient way to deal with this class. So we have to duplicate this method definition to every person. And actually, what JavaScript suggests you to use a prototype. So let's take a look at this picture. So as you can see, we have two users or persons, and yeah, each of them has get full name duplicated. So what JavaScript allows you is to create a new object which will contain the shared properties, shared methods of all of them. So it's get full name. And as you can see, the structure of the object may become like this. So instead of having two objects, we can create maybe a new one that will help us to separate out shared properties in very efficient way. So now when we'll be calling get full name using this object, if it doesn't exist, the JavaScript engine will look at its prototype and call it as if it was defined in exact object, right? So as you can see here, JavaScript itself creating a kind of link here. So it's according to the specification, this link, this relation is hidden, but actually there are some public properties that we can use in order to get it or set it. So let's take a look how we can set prototypes of different objects. So for example, for instance, we have one object with object properties which will be unique for each person, like first name and last name, and another object that will contain the shared methods within all persons. And what we want to say, so we just want to set methods as to be its prototype, to be prototype of person. There are two ways probably to do it. First, it is a special method called set prototype of in global object. We just specifying the first first attribute, first parameter is a target object, and the second one is its prototype. And in order to get prototype of object, we have another method called get prototype of, and we can find out who is what's the prototype of the object. And another way to do this, it's a proto link. Actually, it's a kind of deprecated now, but I think here in our presentation we can use it in order to demonstrate that we can set it and maybe get. So this link, this relation, it is not static, so it can be changed. And yeah, after doing this step or this step, we'll find out that we just linked two objects together, and we can call get full name as if it was defined in person. Yeah, so person is now comes with get full name method. Cool. Let's move on. So let's get back to the case when we were defining classes using regular functions. So in this case, we were defining the get full name method in class in function, but in order to move it out from it, so we can define get full name method in prototype. In this case, prototype it's something similar, but not exactly the same. So prototype it's it's a property of each function, each regular function. This property doesn't exist in error functions, but which becomes useful when we need to instantiate a new object. It's an object which contains additional properties for all objects that will be created using new operator. So let's find out how it works. So if our person class has get full name defined not in constructor functions but in prototype, in this case we kind of separating out this method from the object itself. So when we create a new object using kind of special parameters, we will see that get full name is still available, but now it's not located in object, it's in person, it's located in its prototype. For example, here we can see that person is given a proto. It's a proto link which referring to its prototype, and its prototype is equal to person.prototype. So actually it is a property that will be assigned to the new object. So, and this way we could call new methods using it. Okay. So in this case, as you can see, let me get back. So here, get full name method was defined not in object but in prototype. So prototype is always a different object, a separate object, no matter whether it's a prototype of an object or it's a special property for the function. But as you can see, the get full name is defined in a separate object. But when we call get full name, this is still will be referencing to person itself. So let's see how it looks, how it works under the hood. So in JavaScript, this keyword is not not fixed. The exact value of it will be defined in runtime. So for example, from the previous example, we had the person with get full name. But what if we reassign it? I mean, we'll create another variable with with the same name, and we'll try and reassigning the method of the object to just separate variable, and we'll try to call it. In this case, we'll find out that this keyword is not defined. It will be undefined or pointing to the global window object based on whether you're running in strict mode or not. But it's definitely not referencing to the same person. So it looks like when after reassigning, we losing this keyword. In order to keep this fixed, I mean, there are some ways to do this in JavaScript. You can call bind method. And for example, when actually bind method returns another function where this keyword is actually fixed. So when we call get person dot get full name dot bind, and we bind this full name to person to exact object, and now in a new variable after from reassigning, it will be referencing to the person. So actually, yeah, the bind function can used when defining kind of event listeners. But in this case, you should always remember that bind is returning another function. So when we bind in the function to the certain this, in this case, the new function is not equal to get full names. It's kind of new function. Okay. Any questions, maybe? Please let me know. Still black screen, or sorry, white screen. Reload it. Sorry for the delay. Okay, let's move on. So by executing set prototype of, we're saying that this prototype will become a prototype of person. We'll say that person, the target object, will get or inherit properties from the prototype if they are missing in the person itself. If some property is not found in the prototype, for example, in this case, when calling get full name, it really doesn't exist in exact object, right? So the JavaScript engine will keep going up and find its prototype whether it exists. If it doesn't exist in the object in the prototype, JavaScript will find the prototype of prototype. Okay, and this chain will just maybe maybe long. I mean, it looks like following. So JavaScript engine will be looking through prototype. So again, prototype may be not null, maybe null, maybe defined, but it's the JavaScript engine will be looking for prototype undefined. So it will keep going up until the prototype is value null or undefined will be found. Okay. As I have already mentioned that prototype of the object will be used when the property or function or method doesn't exist in object itself. But let's take a look at some edge cases that we may have. For example, we have person, but we're trying to set a prototype of the person which has the same property, first name. So let's see what value will be used in this case. So as you can see, when we are trying to get access to first name, the JavaScript engine will be looking at the person itself. So yeah, this properties exist. So its value will be returned. But for example, we're trying to delete this. So we're using this operator delete in order to delete first name. So it's no longer exists. So let's see what value will be used in this case for the first name. If it doesn't exist, the JavaScript will look at prototype and will find first name there. So when removing first name from person, we'll see that first name will be obtained from its prototype. So yeah, maybe it looks confusing, but there are some cases when we delete in the property, but it still exists. Maybe with different value, but still, yeah, it's maybe obtained from prototype. And okay, let's, for example, person first name. Yeah, and when we say that prototype is this prototype object is a prototype for person, and we're trying to remove get full name. We're just saying that we're trying to remove get full name. And when we removing the property, it never deals with prototype. When removing property, it's trying to remove it from the target object, not from prototype. So in this case, we're trying to remove the person, but the method will still exist. So another confusion, another strange situation, right? And what we can do here, we can set additional new property that is not exist here in the person. And when we write it, we'll find out that this new property doesn't exist on its prototype. So we can make a conclusion. So when we removing or writing its value or some value to object. So the target object will be used, not prototype. But prototype will be used only when dealing with some reading operations when we're trying to read it. Okay, I hope this is clear. So yeah, now I will show you how we can inherit one class from another. So actually, this situation is kind of similar. So let's take a look. We have a person. It's a class, but it's a function. We call it class in JavaScript with the first name and last name properties, and we have a get full name in this prototype. And we going to introduce another class called user. Actually, the user will have the new property called permissions. Maybe it will be an array of 2 or 1 string where the user is able to read some content or write it. Okay, and user itself contains additional methods in its prototype. Maybe we're trying to find out whether user can read something or not. We're just looking through this new property, and yeah, we're trying to find out whether it exists in this array or not. So what we can do here? So obviously, user should also have the first name and last name because it's some person, right? And the same as get full name. So what we can achieve here, we can merge kind of merge all of these functions to constructor, and everything that was located here in prototype to user's prototype. And let's look at how this can be achieved in JavaScript. So again, we're using ES5 syntax. So things looks a bit more complicated, but you know, we all need to be familiar with how it looks under the hood, because then I will introduce ES6 syntax, where all these things look more maybe easier, but under the hood it's still using the same constructions like prototypes and so on. Okay, let's start from constructors. So yeah, we have a function called maybe user. What we can do here is to merge everything from person to user. In order to do this, we should call a person class with probably you should have already familiar with call method of the function. What it does, it's just trying to call this function using additional, maybe new context. So we're trying to pass this. And the first parameter is the context, and the second and third one will be parameters of the function. So in this case, doing so, this will be referencing not to person, but to the user. And we'll try to set in these properties to the user object. Okay, so this allows you to like kind of merge two constructors to the same function. And for prototype, we need to merge prototypes. I mean, we need to say that all methods that were available in person prototype should be available for the user's prototype. So again, maybe straightforward approach here. Maybe you can say that we could like iterate through the prototype and just copy its values to exact prototype in user. But again, it will be not efficient. So instead of JavaScript allows you to use prototypes. So instead of saying instead of copying it to the exact object, we can say that this prototype will be a prototype of this user's prototype. So again, there are two prototype words, but don't get confused. So yeah, there are two maybe ways to do this. So in here, we're just saying that person's prototype is a prototype of user's prototype field, or we can use another maybe method on global object is method create. What it does, it creates you a new object which prototype is will be exact as passed here. For example, it will be new object with prota. It's pointing to this object. But you know, by default, every function has prototype, and its value is equal to constructor user. Okay, so it's kind of maybe default value for it, and by doing so, we will just rewrite it to undefined. So we're just trying to revert back this value. So actually, it's maybe it's a good practice to do so. So if you're using set prototype of, you don't have to worry about it. But in case of you creating object using object.create, you'll have to restore back the constructor of function. Okay, so in this case, we are merging them together, and then we are defining all methods that were defined were intended for the user's prototype. But there is some addition here. For instance, for our previous person class, we just maybe when we're trying to get the full name, we're just concatenating the first name and last name. But for example, for the user, we don't want to use this logic. We want to like print it out like user and plus exact full name from the person. So in order to do this, we can reuse the logic from the get full name from person. As we know, it returns a concatenated string from first name and last name. So in order to do so, we can actually use the same the same method called call, and we're just changing its context. For example, this will be pointing here to the user. So, and we'll get the user's first name and last name. And then we'll try to concatenate the user label and its full name and last name. Okay, any questions here? I don't see any questions. Okay. Anyway, we'll get back to this maybe during live session, so we'll find out how it works in action. So yeah, back in 2015, I believe, ES6 syntax was introduced. It was a great improvement, so it helped developers to like do the same stuff using more short constructions. And for example, you can see which browser already supporting it. So everything looks good for the majority of browsers, except probably IE 11, which actually doesn't support almost anything from ES6. So that's why, in order to make, if you want to write anything in ES6 syntax, you should have to worry about how to translate ES6 to ES5. So that's why maybe when you try to debug your code that was written in ES6, you'll find out that exact code is written in ES5. It's fine. Maybe some project don't use source maps. But you know, I'm pretty sure that in some legacy projects, some teams may still be using ES6, not ES5, not ES6. So again, it's a great improvement. So let's see how things looks now with introducing ES6. Actually, everything starts with introducing new keyword class. But again, as I've already said, classes don't exist in JavaScript. So here you can see the class is not a new kind of data type. It's just a keyword. So if we'll try to find out, it's when defining a class using such construction and using type of this person, you'll find out it's still a function. So okay. And in order to construct the object, there's new method was introduced called Constructor. So actually, it was doing the same stuff. So it's receiving the person's first name and last name. So here we could maybe do some logic, maybe some initialization and initialize values for the object. In order to define methods, we're no longer using prototype. We define objects just in exact place, no prototypes at all. But again, when you try debugging it, this class, you'll find out that it's still having this prototype special property, so everything stays the same. And I think there are two maybe enhancement here. You can use getters and setters. For example, instead, maybe when you're trying creating a new object and you're trying to get access to full name, it inspired to you can think of it is still property. It's not a method. It's still property. And when you call in full name, you can concatenate. So it kind of is still hiding maybe implementation for this property. So it looks like a regular property, but under the hood, it calculates the value maybe in runtime. And again, the same situation for the setters. For example, we can set full name, but under the hood, we're trying to split the string out using like blank and try to assign in this first name and last name to the object. So again, we'll get back to this maybe during live coding session. Okay, and let's see how we can inherit one class from another. So another keyword was introduced called extends. So instead of again setting and assigning some prototypes, we just say that we just write that admin class is extending properties from person. So here in ES6 we have additional keyword called super. So what it does, it's helps you to call a constructor from the person. Instead of calling person.call and passing this like in ES5 syntax, you can call just super. You don't have to worry about passing this. So it means that super will try to initialize the object with this first name and last name. The logic will be obtaining from its prototype from parent class. And additionally, for example, admin has the same set of permissions. So we're trying to maybe kind of introduce another property here. So as you can see here, we can assign a default value, but as I know, this syntax is kind of experimental. So, but not all JavaScript engines are supporting it. Okay, but in this case, super should go first when you will try when you try accessing super not at the first line. Maybe you will swap these lines, and you will get an error that you should call super at the very beginning. Okay. You can see text screen. So, okay, let's move on. So another feature that was introduced in ES6 syntax, it's something called static methods. When we can define a method called static, and it means that this function will not be defined in any object even when we create some instance of admin. It means that this object will be assigned to admin itself. So it doesn't reference to the object itself. So in ES6 syntax, this will be always admin. So it's kind of not referencing to the object, it's referencing to the class itself. And in most cases, such methods just receive all information in parameters. For example, here we want to clone the object, and we can do this by like creating a new object from scratch. Actually, the same approach could be done in ES5. Maybe I will show you. We'll get back to this a bit later. And as you can see here, in this case, super was referencing to the constructor from the person, so we can call it. And in methods, we still have super, and super can allow you maybe to call the method from person from that. For example, I'm sorry, we're trying to just change the behavior of get full name of the person, where we was concatenating the strings of full name, first name, and last name, and it can be done like maybe we just try in the first line we're completely overriding the get full name implementation. We just sorry for double return, and we're saying that this full name get full name has new logic need, but we can still reuse some logic from persons. So we're just trying to return the new string where we can get full name from the person and get full name for the person returning this one without admin. So you should familiar with private methods. So what is private methods? So it's these methods or properties that are not visible outside of the class. So for example, when creating a class, you should think about methods whether they actually make sense for the user, for the consumer that will be using it. So there are some classes that, there are some methods that can be hidden. For example, in ES6, we can use this sharp sign in order to define private methods. And in ES6 and ES5, you still can use underscore notation. It's kind of name convention that maybe should all developers are following. I mean, whenever you see some method or property which name is starts with underscore, it means that this property is private. So probably when debugging in dev console in the browser, you will see that this property is still accessible. I mean, you can change it, you can play with it, but I do not recommend doing it. So we're saying that this property is private, so we don't need to change this value, because it may just break the whole object of it. And when we're using new syntax, which actually again is a bit experimental, you will see that we even don't have access to this property. So this way we can hide some implementation details. So all methods that are available for the object, like publicly, it's called public API. It's called maybe can call public interface. And there are some, again, properties and methods that are not visible. So we are trying to maybe hide implementation. For example, let's imagine we are driving a car and we have a steering wheel in order to control to direction. We have pedals and accelerators. We can call it like methods, and we have maybe kind of some properties called like current speed and so on. So actually this is what we can see. But I know there are a lot of details that are hidden from the driver, and driver don't have access even to it when driving. So you can think of it like when driving a car, whether we should allow allow exposing some properties to consumer or not. Okay. So another cool thing about maybe JavaScript itself, it allows you to change the behavior of built-in classes. For example, as you can see, even though the word is a literal, I mean, it's a primitive value, it still has some methods. For example, we can maybe create a new method called emotionalize, which will just return a new value of a string plus this like a triple signs. And actually, you will find out that it doesn't exist, so it's not a problem. In JavaScript, we can like extend the prototype of a string, and with the following way. So string prototype in JavaScript, it's a prototype. Prototype is an object with all shared methods that we have already mentioned. So we can extend it by a custom method. Okay, so any custom implementation can go here. So in this case, after doing so, each string in JavaScript will have its own like new method called emotionalize. And also we can extend new classes, built-in classes, sorry. We can create a new class called emotionalizable string, which has additional method called emotionalize. And we can create a new string using not built-in class string, but emotionalizable string. And the new method will be available here as well. And again, I do not recommend doing so, because again, this prototype should be according to the specification. Maybe in some cases we can do so. For example, when our browser doesn't support some methods, but we can introduce them like manually. In this case, such method will be called polyfills. But again, I do not recommend introducing a custom method called like this one. It's just I'm trying to demonstrate that it's still possible. So JavaScript allows you to do so, which is pretty good. And maybe finally we have instance of operator, which helps you to make sure to check whether object belongs to or it was created to was created by some classes. For example, when you have an object and just like empty one, so we will see that object is instance of object because it was created using it. Okay, and in other words, think in JavaScript that function is still instance of object because functions inherited from objects. And when we have a string like a literal, the instance of it is not a string, which is also strange probably at the first sight. But there is some maybe some details in it. So instance of doesn't always checks whether this class is presented in its prototype. For example, we have a custom string that was extended using built-in class string. So in this case, when we create a new string, obviously a new string will be instance of custom string because it's exact class that was used in order to create it. But instance of the same time will return true to for the string. Yeah, because custom string was extended using string, and at the same time custom string will be instance of object because string in JavaScript extends object. So it will be instance of operator is looking at prototypes chain. So it's trying to find whether it presented in a prototype chain or not. So in some cases, it's really helpful when you have methods that can receive parameters in different classes. So you can place a logic to check whether this parameter is an instance of class A or class B, and you can just apply different logic based on the class was used to create the options for some methods. So sorry guys, can you see my screen because it's really blurred? I don't know why.
Yeah, we see, but it's blurred.
It's strange. Okay. I can reload it. It's too much better now. Yeah. So I saw a question. Let me get back. Sorry, I didn't see it. So yeah, when we create a class and we define a new permission. So in this case, if we skip this line, for example, let's imagine it doesn't exist. So in this case, permissions will be available on that object. It's like a kind of default value for all objects that will be created. But here we're just trying to maybe initialize with the new parameter from the constructor. So in this case, it's worth mentioning that when you have permissions and the full name, one of these is method and its property. So in ES6, all properties are will be defined not in prototype, but in object, in target object, and all methods will be defined in prototype. So you should maybe remember it, because in ES6 we can store not only methods in prototype. It can be functions, it can be values. It doesn't really matter. But again, it doesn't make sense to store some values, like not functions, but some properties in prototype, because this property will be exactly the same for all objects. Sorry, I don't really know what the exact use case of it. So don't try to put any properties except methods to prototype. And let me get back to the Fluent interface. So Fluent interface, it's kind of pattern that help you to increase readability of your classes. For example, we have a class. Let's go back. Let's take a look here. We have person. Okay, it's fine when this class has two parameters, like first name and last name. But what if it has maybe 9 or 10 parameters, and you should maybe look through documentation to find out what I need to pass at the first step and the second parameter, and again, it's became maybe unsupportable when you have a lot of parameters here. But in this case, we can create a builder, but what it does here. For example, there are a lot of parameters of our class, and somehow we need to create an instance of it. But instead of passing parameters exactly to the constructor function to the class, we can create a builder with the functions to set the properties. For example, we can create a set of properties in order to set first name, last name, date of birth, email, and so on. And this can look as this. For example, we can create a builder. Actually, it's an empty object, right? It doesn't contain any state, any properties. It's just a set of methods. And we have built method at the end. What we can do here is just we gradually build the object step by step. For example, we built, for example, we set first name, last name, date of birth, email, many other properties if we have such. And at the end, we can call it just builder build that will grab all the informations from these properties. So when we set first name, we just assign it first name to the builder. Last name is get assigned in the same manner. And then when we call build, we can return a new person, which will have this properties specified in exact order. So we only build methods will have will know only how to create a person, which parameters it's receiving, whether email at the sort position of first, and so on. But again, as you can see, builders allows you to simplify things, but we can go further. Let's see. Yeah, maybe back. As you can see here, we can call every time builder, 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 builder. For example, we can maybe combine these methods into one chain so that we don't have to worry about passing this builder every time. So let's take a look how we can simplify things. If we so in the result, we're trying to achieve this. So for example, we have a builder and we can call method to builder and set last name to the first name. So as you can see here, we're just chaining. It allows you to chain methods in order to achieve some certain things. For example, here we're just building person. But in order to achieve this, there is a pattern that says that you can return this from every setter in your builder. So in this case, at every step, the first name, set last name will be returning you the same object of the builder. So, for example, there was a builder at every line, but we can remove it. So example, and here, as you can see, the readability was increased, and yeah, it will be easier to read it and to support. So actually, this Fluent interface will be it will be related to your homework, where you will need to create a kind of builder. So you will have to use the same approach. Just return this, and you'll able to chain your methods in order to build your person. And yeah, probably you have already familiar with Jquery. It's a library that allows you to manipulate with DOM elements attributes. So it's following the same pattern. So it's very easy to read what Jquery does at the very each line. But in this case, Jquery doesn't always return this. It can return additional collections, but anyway, the approach is still the same. We're just allowing to chain methods in order to increase readability. Okay, that's all for now for presentation. Do we have time to do some kind of live coding? What do you think, guys?
Sure, we have.
Okay, just maybe 10 minutes more. So let me, what we can do here. All these classes that was created during the presentation, like admins, persons, they are really good for demonstrating core features. But as we are front-end developers, we will be dealing mostly with these components. So let's take a look how we can use this approach. I mean, creating classes in order to wrap some logic around UI components. Here I will be using ES6 syntax with Bootstrap. So Bootstrap it's a UI framework which has some built-in components. So what I can do here, I will be creating a class that will be responsible for our custom input. So it will be just one field in a form. Okay, so it will be another class. It will called maybe not custom. Let's say it will be called input control, and we'll have a new class that will be extended from input control called input group control. So actually, it will be representing a new just regular control input. Sorry, as the input group, it will be like input and a small button in order to submit, maybe to send some information to the server. And also, I will be creating a base class for all our component. Let's call it control. So after this, after defining our structure, our maybe prototype chain or just inheritance chain, let's start with defining our public methods. For example, I can say that every control should have render method that will actually render something to the page. Also, I can say that I want to create a set state. We'll try to mimic React.js. Okay. So what it does, state by default, it's receiving new state. And let's use a kind of private variable called state with underscore. I could use this notation with sharp, but again, it's throwing some errors that is still maybe experimental, but let's stick to underscore. It's fine for now. So we here want to assign a state to private variable, and maybe you're already familiar with React. When setting state, React automatically re-renders the component. So we want to set state and re-render. Okay. So, and we should have a constructor. Actually, constructor is not always required. So you can maybe omit it, but by default it equals like this. So it's just empty function. You can maybe, if you don't need constructor, you can remove it. It's fine. But in our case, we do want to have it in order to set some properties. For example, when creating control, I could pass some state, like default state for rendering. Here I could assign it to the private variable as well. And what I could do here, I could create another property called element. And it will be a root element of every control that we'll have. And we'll use a document.create element. So it's good. Let's choose div, so it will be blocked by default. And after this, I'll try to just assign it to the document itself. So we have a document body. Oh, sorry. So yeah, actually, this is probably what I want to use for the base logic. For example, yeah, what we can do here, what we're actually doing here, we are just passing a state to a control, just storing it as a private variable. In the constructor, we're creating a new element as a root element and assign it to a DOM. I know for now it's not ideal, but for our purposes, it's pretty fine to have such logic in a constructor. And what I can do here, for example, when you're creating a class that you don't have you don't maybe know what to place into render, you can just go for some default implementation, like maybe element dot render it. Okay, we have a class that we can actually test. So let's take a look how it works. So it's not working. Control never used. Problem maybe something missing here. Maybe this element. Sorry guys, I'll debug it for a while. It's not even assigned. Cool. Okay. Okay, let's move on and try to implement our input control, maybe. Okay. I forgot to call render, right? So yeah, render. Okay, yeah, here we are. We have like a default implementation, but you know, in this case, I don't want to put any implementation here. I'll try to just maybe to clear our element, so it will be always cleaning our root element. So for example, for the input control, I just want to render an input. So actually what I can do here, maybe I don't need constructor at all, but let's rewrite the render itself. For example, here I want to create an input. So for example, an input control, which is from native implementation. With the same document create elements, I believe. So let's take a look how it works now. Let's move this to the very bottom. Control, we have input control. We call this input control. Oh, I've been child of undefined. Okay, because we didn't call a constructor of the parent. So here, if we don't specify it, so the parent constructor probably won't be called. So let's find out. Oh, we didn't stand it. Okay, cool. So we want to inherit it from the base control. Oh, it's much better. We don't even need to create a constructor here, so it will be inherited from the control. So yeah, we have an input here. So probably I can style it according to the bootstrap. So with adding some classes, class list at maybe to apply this fancy look. Okay, no better. But here's the thing: in order, if we call 2 times render, it will render two inputs here because we don't call in super class super render, which actually should clean our element at all. So yeah, whenever we just call in render one more time, we'll have an always empty root element, which is good. Okay, and here probably let's assume that we want to pass like maybe some initial properties for it, like let's introduce a placeholder. So yeah, we have a placeholder here, which actually, when we pass in this value, I believe it should be assigned to a constructor. So let's take a look. Will it work? So we want to find a placeholder here. And in this case, placeholder will be stored. Okay, here you are. Yeah, as you can see here, we can use our state that was initialized by this object. And this object was passed to this constructor and was assigned to the private property. And then we could use a private property in order to, like, assign it to our attributes. Cool. And then, as you can see, for example, we call a set state method. We can test it, for example. Let's assign a new placeholder, maybe 2. Yeah. So as you can see, we can maybe change or render attributes component on the fly. Okay, and one more class that I wanted to introduce, it's called input group. So here I wanted to implement the rendering logic. So here I'll be, okay, let's test this. Let's test it in the following way. So let's introduce one more input control. And try to render it. Input group control was not inherited, right? So yeah, in this case, we're trying to inherit from input. So input group control, test placeholder. Okay, so we have, let's remove this. Super render. Oh, okay. It's interesting with why do I have two form controls? Okay, okay, maybe I need to remove it. And two placeholders. Oh, okay, I got it. So as you can see here, we're just trying to reuse logic from the input control, which just trying to render the same input. So what we can do here is to add some button to it. For example, I just want to introduce just small button next to the input itself. So let's add it. Okay, so in this case, I do need to pass something called button label, button text, to provide a label for the button. Okay, let's assume how can use it. Let's see how can use it. So button. Okay, cool. We have a new button here. So as you can see, what we're doing here, we're trying to render the same input here, and we're trying to just append additional element to our root element. Yeah, so we're just trying to reuse what we have here, but with introducing a new input here, and a new button here. Sorry, and let's add some fancy look as well. Maybe so. Yeah, if we want to add a couple of classes here, we can just enumerate them. Yeah, it looks much better. So what we can do here, maybe actually we can add any additional logic we may have for inputs, but let's just final step to demonstrate you how getters and setters are working. Let's assume we need to introduce a new setter in order to define a value for the input and a getter to get the value. So for the setter, we're just trying to set the value for our input. At first, we need to find our input in root element. So we call this element with query selector, and we're trying to find the input itself and return its value. Okay. Query selector. Oh, okay. We're trying to assign value. And then we can also try getting it the same. We're just trying to find it and just return it its value. Okay, cool. So for example, let's test it just a little bit. Maybe we have input control and we have a new property called value. For example, we can set it like test string. Control input. Sorry, guys. Not in Oh, probably we didn't render it at all. Okay, let's do it here. Yeah, as you can see, we just set the value for the input, and also we can get it. So yeah, we can return this value using getter. So we just using this snippet in order to get the value of the input. And the last one, let's add some logic in order to change. For example, I want to pass something here, and when clicking on submit, I will change maybe value of the same input from here. So let's take a look how we can do this. So we need to add some logic here in order to subscribe to click button. So let's add a method to it. Add click button handler, which will receive a callback. So probably you're already familiar with event delegation, so it's a good place to use it because when we're constantly rendering our component, we should use event delegation on the root on the root element in order to not to lose the event listener to the on the submit button. So let's take a look how it works. So as we know, we have element. So instead of if we want to handle click event on the button, so what we can do here is to find this button and call add event listener. Okay. Then we specify and click, and we call in callback. So let's test it. We have input group. We have add click button handler. And here, what we can do is we're trying to get the value of this input, and we'll be assigning this value to the first one. So let's take a look at it. We'll have input control value. So we're using a setter for the first element, for the first input, and we're using a getter from the second one. So it's pretty simple. Let's remove this. So let's take a look whether it's working. Here we are. Here you are. Sorry. And yeah, we just assigning this value from here to here. But let's take a look whether it will work when we re-render input group one more time. Is it first time? It works. It doesn't work. So the logic is broken after rendering. In order to fix it, we have to use event delegation. So instead of finding this query, this button inside of element, we should add event listener to the host element, to the root element, and we can use event object that is available in our callback, and we'll be trying to find out whether our target actually is a button. So yeah, maybe we can check for its check for its classes. So if we clicked on something and it has button class, probably it's a button. So probably in this case we can simplify it, and it will work well. Let's take a look how it works now. So let's test it first time. It works, and it works any other time after rendering. So as you can see here is the key is to define the public API for our controls. Very important to define our actually inheritance way how we inherit which class from which. And for example, if you take a look at something called closure library, which is pretty old, but it has a kind of a rich UI to define our controls, and you will see that it has maybe deep nesting of inheritance. So yeah, it's well written. So I actually recommend looking into it to find out how the first Gmail was created. So actually, it contains a lot of UI components, but you know. They're all well tested and well written, as I can see. So yeah, that's all I've got. Maybe any questions, comments? Was it helpful for you? If not, I will stop. Oh, sorry, I'm not even presenting. So, any questions? Okay, if no questions, I will send you a link so you can try it out. Maybe we'll come up with any elegant way to define our controls or whatever. Maybe some business logic can be explained in terms of classes. So again, yeah, it's very complex, and you know, you have to write a lot of classes in order to actually understand a better way to maybe set in some public methods and so on. But again, it's still applicable in terms of modern development. We need to define classes. A lot of frameworks allows you to inherit one component from another. So actually, it's really helpful to find out and actually know how it works. In ES5 or ES6, it doesn't really matter. You know, you should know how to extend something from another. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry, for such